Bloody hell, I'll be right back. I have to turn on some friggin' lights. And I forgot to hang my apron up last night when I was done. Damn it, I smoked too much. Anyway, what's today's topic gonna be? Well, I'll start off shilling because it's... Get in there! Just kidding. But I'll start off shilling because tonight is... not bad. Tonight is the Shades of Dominion podcast. Live stream. Game stream. Gamecast. Anybody else remember Sega Dreamcast? No. Actually, I think a lot of people do, and I only ever played one game on the thing. Literally one game. Okay, so this is what the topic's going to be. Check the description for the video link for Shades of Dominion. Like, share, subscribe, comment. If you feel I deserve it, there is a donation link. Sultans of too many sibilants, Bezic. Sultans of Shadilay on Saturday. The Ask Ardent live stream on Sunday. I have a really fun thing for Sunday, which I hope won't be completely mauled over by the time Saturday or Sunday rolls around. Though I suspect it might be. Okay, so I was talking about the Dreamcast, and I remembered that the one time I actually played with a Dreamcast controller in my hand was at a mall at... might have been a video game rental store. It wasn't a GameStop. I don't think there was even GameStops then, or at least there weren't here in Newfoundland. But you remember the old standy thing had the TV and had the two controllers with the system kind of locked into it, so you couldn't change the game. When new systems came out, that's how I first played Dreamcast, possibly even Sega Genesis. Hell, possibly even Super Nintendo. Trying to think if there were any other systems that I tried the first... Oh, what was the NEC system? ...3DS, maybe? I remember there was a Philips thing that was produced, and that seemed very similar to the PlayStation. Played Road Rash on that thing. In any case, what I'm talking about is how, or what I meant to talk about, rather, is how very effective those were for encouraging people to look at purchasing a new game system. And I'm honestly surprised that isn't done anymore. I imagine it probably fell by the wayside because too many people were ripping them off somehow. Or the companies figured they were too expensive to send out to stores for the return. Like, there just wasn't the return on investment on it. Personally, I'd love to have a few of those because I think it would be an interesting... Well, it wouldn't be an idea that would fly here. The population simply isn't high enough for it or young enough for it. But something akin to an arcade and a bar combined would be or an arcade and a pub rather, not a bar. But somewhere where you could go and you could have darts in one corner, pool in another corner, and an Xbox or whatever nostalgia console in the other, and maybe two or three arcade games in another. And the idea being that basically you walk in the door and the outer walls are all some sort of gaming, and the center would be the bar. Of course, I can rapidly see that devolving into fighting over gambling, but nah, had to accept certain risks with alcohol involved anyway. Uh, but I think that would be a great idea for a business. And you could always have an upstairs area or downstairs area where, you know, it might be better to have it in the basement, where you could run tabletop role playing games or tabletop gaming with no electronics involved. I certainly miss the days when I used to sit down at a big table with my friends and a bag of dice, but that's me. But what I'm more talking about is how some really good advertising gimmicks have kind of fallen by the wayside. That particular, the stand with the game system in it, that was an amazing word of mouth setup, because you would literally have people telling their friends, hey man, there's this game, or there's this console, or there's whatever at this place. Excuse me. And it would drive business because kids, when they were out shopping with their parents, would gravitate to it. Uh, and the parent might be looking at it going, this would be a very good distraction for little Jimmy. Something to keep his very, very energetic self out of my way. Bad parenting. But hey, I grew up in the 80s. It was the time of bad parenting. Uh, or at least the beginning of bad parenting. But, and I'll take a tangent here. Now we're at the point where the last thing you should want is for your young children to be exposed to electronics, especially anything internet connected. Um, I've said it before in multiple different forums online. Parents have to raise their kids, or the internet will. And apparently, I guess I need to add an addendum to that. Parents need to school their kids, or some commie will. But just as you have to be patrolling of the content that your children absorb or peruse, and that it doesn't matter whether it's the internet, movies, video games, books, clearly books. But you have to be aware of what your kids are looking at for two reasons. One, so that you know what your kids are being exposed to, and two, so that you can challenge it. When I was a kid in the early 80s, and when I say kid, I mean prepubescent, the big thing that I was into was the old ninja movies, Shokasugi. Yeah, especially the Shokasugi movies. If you're a gamer, you might recognize that guy's name from the Tenchu series. Him and his son Kane were the ones who were involved with those games. And I mean, it was as close to live action anime as you were going to get at that point. There were quite a few times where Sho would chop a guy halfway in half with that sword, and there'd be a massive fountain of blood. And I mean, my mother was right there watching this with me. Or usually, we had one TV, for example, and one VCR. Might have even been a beta at that point. So I'm plunked down watching this, engrossed as all hell, of course. And my mother would lean over from time to time when something really gory or something really, really disturbing would happen. And she'd say, you know, this is just a movie, it's not real. And I was aware of that fairly quickly. But one thing that my parents didn't let me do at the time was watch the news, the daily uh, evening news. Uh, and I understand why, because one of the first news stories I ever watched was about a sniper attack in Sarajevo. It was at the beginning of the Yugoslav conflict. And uh, one of the images that really sticks with me is a bloodied sheet over some woman's corpse. Uh, Now, that was one of the first times I saw actual uh, real world violence portrayed on TV. And that image has stuck with me because it was real. And it really solidified the difference for me between fantastic violence and real violence. And I think having that differentiation in my mind really prevented me from being desensitized to real world violence. Um, and I mean, you take games like Call of Duty, or I don't know about Tarkov. I haven't played Tarkov. I haven't even seen all that much gameplay from Tarkov. But Rainbow Six Siege, whatever. The gore is fairly realistic. But people who play a lot of those games, younger people than me, I've noticed that when, as vicious and violent as they may be when they're gaming, if they're confronted with real world violence, they tend to freeze, or they tend to have a shock reaction. Where if I'm confronted with real world violence, my first instinct is to do something about it. Not to freeze and observe, because I'm not holding a controller. I am the controller, in a sense, in that I have the ability to interact and to know, because of my background. I've done a lot of first aid. I've worked search and rescue a couple of times. Um, I've got skills and experiences that, in a sense, I suppose, have prepared me to be a rescuer. And a lot of the work I've done, I've been a security guard, a bouncer, um, and a security guard in a hospital, I should point out. So I'm not unfamiliar with crisis, uh, how to put it, with responding to crises. And plus, when I was a kid, I mean, we were wild kids, so occasionally someone would get injured, or someone would be in some sort of potentially life-threatening situation. And it wasn't like we could go and grab an adult and come back and they'd be okay. We knew we had to help them now. One of my friends, for example, fell really badly on shale and cut themselves pretty deep. Now, having grown up seeing my injuries taken care of, I knew how to respond to that. Of course, immediately made a bandage and compressed it, got them help. Uh, but kids today, I don't know if they would know how to respond to a crisis like that. And that's where the parents come in. You have to prepare your kids to deal with real life. Uh, and letting them spend all their time on the internet prevents them from developing the mental calluses that are necessary for that. Um, and I mean, I understand why people stopped letting their kids go outside. There was a massive pedophile scare in the 90s in Canada. Places where there wasn't a lot of gun violence. The terror wasn't not there. It was replaced with something else, generally pedophiles and the fear of kidnapping. Uh, which, to be fair, is a legitimate fear, but as is done by the mainstream media now, even more obviously than it used to be, it was blown out of proportion. Um, if you live in a small town, let your kids play outside. Encourage your kids to play outside with other kids. And if they fight, it's really hard to watch children being violent towards one another. But um, and I want to articulate this carefully. It's very difficult to watch children being violent with one another, but sometimes it's necessary. As with, and I'm sure there are people who are going to be very upset with me for making this comparison, but as with puppies, or, well, no, puppies are probably the best example. Puppies need to socialize so that they learn their place in the pecking order, which is not quite as applicable to people as you might think, but they also learn that violence is a two-way street, and that it is not necessarily a good resort. Um, Pups, when they nip at older dogs or harass older dogs too much, are generally immediately corrected by the older dog, where the older dog will turn around and either growl, snap, or potentially even nip the younger one to sort them out. And you might hear a yelp from the younger one, but there's no real harm done. And generally, that's immediately the end of the problem. Uh, and it's similar with children as well, because when kids learn to fight, and I did a lot of fighting when I was a boy, uh, but when kids fight, they learn that violence is not that it's wrong, but that it's something that needs to be controlled. It needs to be used in a very specific manner, uh, and under very specific circumstances. And this more applies to boys than girls because girls simply aren't physically violent the way boys are. Girls are far more vicious, and anyone who doesn't think so is a damn fool. Girls learn psychological techniques to put others in their place, so to speak. Whereas with boys, we'll sort it out with our hands. And it's generally a good idea to let that happen when they're young enough that they can't do a lot of damage to each other. Um, an 8-year-old is not going to give another 8-year-old a concussion with a punch. But if you take that same 8-year-old, or you take an 8-year-old who's been prevented from fighting for his entire life, and coddled, and you then put him as an 18-year-old in a situation where he has no recourse to social skills because he's never learned the value and uh, restraint required when it comes to violence, then you have an 18-year-old who, when he gets upset, throws a punch and could seriously injure someone because he's never learned that restraint. Jordan Peterson has said before that men should be monsters, but they should be controlled monsters, and that you can't be a good person without the ability to do bad. Both of these are true. They should be obvious truisms. And I realize I've completely gone off on a tangent from where I originally started. But the important thing with letting children be violent amongst themselves is that they will learn that violence doesn't solve all their problems. For example, with me, I learned that I could fight Jimmy, for example, but then because I grew up in southern Newfoundland, I might have to fight Jimmy's cousin because Jimmy's cousin is picking up for Jimmy. Well, I was a tough kid, so I could handle Jimmy, and I could handle Jimmy's cousin. and I could handle Jimmy's cousin's buddy. Not all at the same time, though that did happen at least once or twice. But, and understand that I was bullied. So when I turned around, I was defending myself when I threw punches. Uh, Not so much necessarily with my brother, but that's a different story. Um, but being bullied, I was using violence to defend myself. And I may have used, and this is something that's so far back that it's actually passed out of my memory, but when I was really, really young, I may very well have used violence to solve a problem. And not necessarily that sort of issue where I'm defending myself so much as exercising the idea of might makes right. So, say one of the kids, one of the family, a lot of my cousins are around my age, so we played together a lot. But say it was something like one of my cousins was playing with a toy that I wanted to play with. And again, this is way back, probably toddler level. Uh, and it's quite possible, and I've seen this with family members down through the years, it's quite possible that I simply pushed the other kid over and took the toy. Now, having good parents, I would immediately have been chastised for this and taught thereby that violence in service of personal gain was not acceptable. And one of the phrases that my family still uses to this day is use your words. And I'm sure there's lots of people who are familiar with telling children that. So that's kind of where I come down on the letting kids fight thing. Let them fight so they learn not to fight. They learn why they shouldn't fight. And they learn that when you punch Jimmy, it might feel good, but when Jimmy punches you, it sure doesn't. And then that gives you the impetus to find a different way. Realized I just rambled on about child violence for a while. Hopefully this doesn't get me a strike. Susan, for the record, this is neither medical advice, parenting advice, nor any sort of advocation of violence. I swear. Actually, to be fair, and to not lie, sorry, I've got something on the camera there, but to be fair and to avoid lying, the truth of the matter is I do advocate violence allowed amongst very young children because it sorts out who's going to be a bully, who's going to be bullied. It teaches kids that they are able to defend themselves, so it shows them that they have agency, that they have the ability to affect their world, and teaches them that they have the responsibility to affect their world in a very specific way, in a way that doesn't do harm to others, because doing harm to others invites someone doing harm to you. I think I'm done. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. I have to check the time here. It's just about time for Lotus Eaters, so this video should be uploaded fairly quickly, before the end of Lotus Eaters anyway. And yeah, so the link is in the description for the Shades of Dominion session tonight. Sultans on Saturday, Asgardant on Sunday. Yeah, okay. So hopefully you guys are having a good day. Hopefully you continue to have good days. And rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.